Talk about a shallow approach and a running or roll-on landing. So why would you use this technique? Again, in most cases, if you're using this technique, it's because you didn't do your proper planning. You're trying to land somewhere with a high density altitude and you don't have sufficient power in order to come in and do a normal landing where you come in, you go to a hover, and you don't if you don't have the power to hover, then you can't do a normal landing pretty much. So there's other circumstances where you might do this if you had a control malfunction, but we haven't talked about those things yet. So you might see this kind of come back, this topic at least. So what is this? Basically, you're going to treat your helicopter like it's an airplane. You're going to come in pretty shallow, like 3 to 5 degrees. This is approximately the kind of approach path or glide slope, if you will, that you would have with an instrument landing system approach, an ILS. So what do you want to do? You want to keep that speed up a little bit, and you want to come in nice and shallow. So you're not going to be bringing in nearly as much collective. And typically for training, we'll simulate this situation by saying, hey, you can't use all the power available. We're going to knock off a couple of inches of manifold pressure and make you deal with that. So we come in and we want to come with a very shallow descent, and then we can lower the collective just a little bit as we come in, and we can slow the helicopter with a tiny bit of aft cyclic right here at position 2. Now, as we approach the surface, we typically want to touch down right about ETL speed or slightly above it. And why is that? Well, our rotor system's much more effective. And why not way above it? Well, we don't want to be skidding down the runway too fast. And the other thing you need to know is that ETL drops off pretty quickly. The effective translational lift, the effect of that is going to diminish fairly rapidly with speed. So as you're skidding down the runway and you're slowing down, if you're just a little bit below ETL, you're going to lose a lot of lift. So as you get kind of close, you want to make sure that you've leveled the helicopter. If you have to err on one side or the other, having the helicopter slightly nose low is better than having it nose high. Nose high is bad for a couple of reasons. Number one, the skids on your helicopter are not meant for hitting the heels. You hit the heels and it's going to kind of lever it to smack down the nose. Whereas if you hit the toes, it will just sort of slide on, and it's more happy doing that. Now, once you've made ground contact, you're going to have to use the pedals to maintain directional control and resist the urge to drop the collective. This is a common thing we do. We're doing a normal approach. We're doing a set down. We come up on our spot. We're at our spot. We touch the ground and we slowly lower the collective. And that's a good thing. When you're sliding, that's not a good thing, because if you're not careful and you lower that too quickly, now it's going to grab. And you might kind of jerk the helicopter to a stop. You might have the nose go really low. You might respond to that by pulling aft on the cyclic, and that could cause things like a tail strike to happen. So be very careful when you're doing this. Like everything else, slow, smooth, small. So what are some common problems that people have with this maneuver? They come in too nose high, and now the tail is dangerously low. They don't use sufficient collective and throttle to cushion the landing. They don't maintain their heading. Sometimes you got to nip it in the bud right away, right? How is it easy to go straight? Well, don't let yourself land when you're not going straight. They don't apply enough anti-torque pedal as they add a little bit of collective to cushion the landing. They get too slow. They get below that ETL speed. They touch down with a lot of ground speed. They don't touch down at an appropriate attitude. Again, things like heel low instead of toe low on the skids. They don't maintain the RPMs. If you let your RPMs drop off, a couple of things are going to happen. Helicopter is going to settle more, and the rotor blades become less rigid. And when the rotor blades are less rigid, bad things can happen. And finally, sometimes you maintain poor alignment with the direction of travel during your touchdown. You touch down in a crab. And that's especially bad if you plan on sliding forward. So that is a running or roll-on landing.
All right, let's go ahead and try a shallow approach and landing. This should be a little bit fun today. I always like to try to fly real world conditions. And the winds are currently gusting to about 30 knots at Mount Pocono here. So we'll go ahead and give it a try. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on to my final and remember, we're going to treat this kind of like an airplane. We're going to come in really shallow compared to our norm. Now at the moment, my airspeed is a little high, but that's okay today. For one thing, my ground speed is still not that high, even with this, but I'm going to slow it down as I get a little closer. And because I'm playing like I'm an airplane, I'm also going to land just a little bit longer than I normally would. Actually, I'm going to land a lot longer than I normally would in a helicopter. All right, so we're coming down here. We're about 200 feet now. And we're going to slowly start bleeding off the speed. Let's get a little closer. We'll continue to bleed off that speed. And a day like today, I can probably actually touch down and still be well above ETL speed, unless I want to slide backwards. So I'm just coming in nice and shallow. A couple of key things, don't land on the heels first and resist the urge to immediately drop that collective as soon as you touch. So I'm going to get it a little bit slower. Try to land this thing and use no more than about 15 inches of manifold pressure. Just going to slide it right on. All right, using my pedals for directional control. Sliding just a little bit, and now I've come to a stop. And you'll notice that it is quite a bit windy today. I'll go ahead and drop my collective. So in fact, I do have just a little bit of airspeed still reading, even though I'm obviously sitting still. So that's how you do a run-on, or if you have wheels, a roll-on landing.